Welcome back to the Puck Bunker. I'm Rocco Zappia, joined as always by my co-host, the man who claims he could have made one of those teams as a goaltender, Darren Boyce. And today we have a very special guest, McKeen's hockey director of scouting, Brock Otten. We're super excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
We're going to jump right into it. The topic today is obviously the Hlinka just finished up. We're going to recap that. I gotta apologize to our American fans. I was a hater. I didn't even pick them for a medal, and here I am eating my words once again, as per usual. Something I'm getting very used to in this business. However, they probably, in my opinion, they had the best team. They deserved to win. They played a hell of a tournament and massive win for that country, who typically does not have as much success at the Hlinka tournament. So, despite the fact that they are a traditional hockey heavyweight, this does have a little bit of Rudy vibes to it for the Team USA, and they came through with the gold medal. So, Brock, let's jump right into it. Give me your thoughts on that gold medal game specifically, and who may have stood out to you for either side, really.
Yeah, it was a really good U.S. team, like you said. Personally, I did expect them to medal. I thought it was a really good team on paper, just based on some of the players that I had known about, some of the guys that had signed in the CHL, some of the guys that were big-time USHL players last year. The gold medal game, I mentioned on Twitter, it was kind of a tough watch. Wasn't the best officiating. The whole tournament was kind of rough in that regard, but the gold medal game in particular, I feel like the refs kind of ruined the flow a little bit. Felt like the whole game was spent on the power play. So I don't know, really, did we learn anything from that game that we didn't already know from the rest of the tournament's performances? I wouldn't say necessarily so, but the U.S. in general had a lot of strong individual performances as well. The one guy that really stood out for me was Davidson. He's going to be, I think, a really good WHL player, eligible next year because of a late birthday. But he was a guy that I didn't know a ton about, coming from Shattuck. So he was somebody who really opened my eyes. A power game, lots of skill. I think he's going to fit right in the WHL and be a name that we look at next year, along with Gordon-Carroll as well, coming out of the WHL. Two late birthday guys that were on this team that I think are going to be guys that we look at as potential first rounders next year. I like Levi Harper on the back end as well, who's going to be in Saginaw, right in my region this year. Another late birthday. I feel like this whole U.S. team was almost late birthdays, which is interesting because you'd think that those guys would be a little bit more physically immature, and that wasn't the case. Some of their later birthday guys were some of their best players. So yeah, I liked Harper on the back end, really good offensive instincts. Really excited to see how he plays in Saginaw, especially if he's filling in sort of that Zane Parekh role if he makes Calgary. Klepov, again, another Saginaw guy, I thought played really, really well. Zielinski, Hextall, I mean, really the whole team. And that's why they won that. They were a team that found a lot of chemistry. The Swedes definitely, I don't know if they necessarily had the depth that the U.S. did. Their main focus was obviously their first couple of lines, and outside of that, they didn't get a ton out of their bottom six. And Canada, I felt like just didn't really gel in the tournament. So I think that was sort of their undoing.
So the question I have, it looked like the U.S. almost had, three lines of pretty high-end forwards that they were playing out there, which I'm not sure even, Canada should have had that, but I'm not sure they totally, did have that. The other thing that kind of surprised me, though, was we had talked about Canada's defense that was the key difference between the two teams, was that Canada's defensive depth should have been, we would say better. It didn't really turn out that way. So how did you feel that Canada's D-core kind of played, and what did you think of everyone kind of, coming into the tournament kind of highly ranked? What did you think of their performances?
Yeah, it was definitely a little underwhelming. Again, I think a lot of it was chemistry related. I think that there didn't seem to be a lot of comfort in their pairings. They kind of moved them around a little bit. I don't know if either of their three pairings really found a comfort level in terms of playing off of each other and I think that was sort of shown in some of the turnovers that Canada suffered in the medal round, and even in the round robin to a certain degree. They had some trouble exiting their zone. I think guys didn't really know sort of what they needed to do. And I don't know if that's on coaching staff or what, or if that's an individual player performance issue. Guys like Verhoeff did struggle to get the puck out of their own end. And that's something that I guess we're going to have to keep an eye on. I don't think Landon Dupont had a great tournament. Verhoeff was inconsistent. Ryan Lynn struggled, in my opinion, a little bit defensively, which was a little bit surprising. I thought Carels and Rudolph were probably the most consistent. But I think overall, that was sort of the undoing for Canada, other than the fact that, I feel like their offensive lines, like you said, couldn't really get going. And again, is that on coaching staff? They are mixing the lines up constantly, trying to find something that worked, and they just couldn't. And then you look at the utilization. I'm not sure some of the guys that were on power play one I would have had on power play one. But I mean, we're nitpicking here, right? It's a short tournament. The team that wins is often the one that gels the quickest. That's usually not an issue for Canada at the Hlinka Gretzky, because other teams are sort of facing the same issue. But yeah, I think overall I was very underwhelmed with the defense of Canada. I thought that was going to be a major strength, and it wasn't. I don't think it's any reason to really say like make any drastic changes to your evaluations of these players based on a single tournament. But it's something to look for moving forward as these players return to their leagues.
Can I ask too, just because the U.S. team, I think, kind of provided a different level, for these D, kind of compared to maybe a Finland, who was kind of a bigger squad, maybe not as quick. But when they played the U.S., this is a very fast, kind of in your face type team. Like they were very aggressive on their forechecking, and that is that kind of something you'll be looking at moving forward, how these guys deal with, kind of faster teams and faster guys.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the U.S. and Finland, to an extent, were probably the two most physical teams at the tournament. I think Canada's sort of lack of physicality was another sort of underwhelming component of their game. And that's not to say that they weren't capable of playing that way. They definitely have a lot of players on that roster that can play that style. But for whatever reason, it just wasn't consistent. Whereas the U.S. were just hounds in puck pursuit. Their forechecking was great. Their speed was great. Their pace was great. And it gave teams fits all tournament. So yeah, I mean, when you look at some of the U.S. guys that really found success playing that role, I'm going to be looking at some of those guys, especially some of the OHL related guys, like Caden Harvey, like Jackson Williams. There's definitely, I would say Zielinski probably fits in that group too. They had an identity, and they played it to a T.
Brock, I want to come back to the gold medal game, and I have some further thoughts on Canada. We'll continue talking about them in a little bit, but you mentioned the officiating, and I felt the exact same way as you did. I actually caught myself at one point yelling at the TV to quote unquote let the kids play. So that's how I felt about it. And specifically, what were your thoughts on that call with 2 minutes left to basically seal? Boga scores that fifth goal right off the faceoff, and there's soft calls, and then there's that call with 2 minutes left in the gold medal game. The goalie makes a save. Yes, okay, he's got it there, but the whistle hasn't gone yet. You're taught to go to the net there and try to put your stick and fish it loose. Not to mention the American guys got in, gave him a shot after that. I was pretty surprised they didn't take both, but is that something that you wish they would kind of? The NHL changes the rule book a little bit in higher stake situations, but I feel like fans and teams appreciate that. Is that something that you would have liked to have seen kind of go? Because that really took away any chance Sweden had of tying that game.
Yeah, I'm not sure that call was as bad as that one. Was it in the first where I forget who it was on the forecheck, or was it maybe he was trying to exit his own end, ducked the check, and then got called for tripping after the guy missed him. That was probably one of the worst calls I think I've ever seen in all my years of watching hockey. I honestly don't know how you're an official and you call that tripping. That one was the one that stood out to me as being like, oh my God, what am I watching here? What are we in for this game? But that I don't think that call can happen that late in the game. That really took the wind out of Sweden's sails. Like you said, it's just a competitive atmosphere. You're trying to win a gold medal in the Hlinka. Don't think the puck was necessarily covered from that player's perspective. And the whistle's got to be put away there. But I think to a certain extent, the whole game, right? Like it was just, as you said, I think it was you said earlier, Rocco, it was kind of the ref show, right?
Yeah, I mean, the whole second period, I mean, it was a special teams contest. I mean, that's international. That's double IHF hockey for you. One guy, and obviously, you do focus a lot on the OHL, and someone that Darren and I talked about coming into the tournament, someone that we were pretty excited to see how they stacked up against the top skill guys was Brooks Rogowski. How do you think he performed in contrast to some of the other big bodies? Ethan Belchetz, obviously the name I'm getting at. Rubric, not at the tournament, but someone you're quite familiar with as well. Did he do enough to put himself and say, hey, there's more than two skilled big guys here? Or do you think he fits more towards that William Horkov, maybe later first, early second type, bottom six, typical more big guy, I suppose?
I think it remains to be seen. I think that the tournament definitely brought to light some issues that Rogowski has. I think it was clear that he needs to continue to bulk up. He was able to create a decent amount north-south. I liked his defensive play in the tournament. The U.S. was utilizing him sort of in that role, but he had trouble finishing. He was getting chances near the slot, near the crease, wasn't able to finish. Was having some trouble hanging onto the puck under pressure. So I think it sort of brought to light some of his needs this year, but it also showcased his upside as a big man that can move and that has those sort of physical tools, like you mentioned, like a Horkov, like a Jack Nesbitt, those types of guys that NHL teams are going to value as true pivots. So I'm really curious to see how Rogowski plays in Oshawa this year and how he improves. I think we're not going to really get an evaluation on him until the second half of the OHL season. I think the first half, it's about him settling into a new role in Oshawa, taking on more responsibility. And then second half of the year, we're going to see sort of how he improves, do those areas of his game really take a step forward. And then we kind of have a guy that we project as more than just a bottom line sort of big pivot, or is that sort of an evaluation that we kind of stick on? But he's a guy that I really like. I have a lot of time for. I would have him, in probably my late first, early second right now, just based on the upside of what the physical tools are for him. Because when he fills out, I mean, we saw flashes of that at the Hlinka, right? When he fills out, he's going to be a real tough check for defenders in the OHL. He's going to be a tough check for defenders moving forward. He's a long-term project for sure, but he was great last year for Oshawa as a rookie, and I do have high expectations for him.
I like that you mentioned that he's likely a strong second half scout there, and you see that, and I don't want to, I'm not saying player comparisons, but you see this in the last couple drafts. Big guys fly up the draft towards the second half. No surprise to us, but it happened with Nesbitt last year, Beckett Seneca the year before that. And I again, not making a skill comparison, but I do like that you brought that he might be a guy who shoots up the second half as he kind of fills out and gets more comfortable in that role. One more question on the Americans, and I'll turn it over to Boyce. Couple very highly skilled players. How would you contrast maybe the current draft stock of Hextall and Klepov? And then secondary to that, we're talking about the guys next year. Schaefer Gordon-Carroll, to me, that's some of the most impressive two-way play I've seen from a D-1 guy in quite some time. Where would he stack up on your way too early to have a proper assessment on next year's draft class? Very early thoughts on him.
Yeah, Gordon-Carroll would be above those other two, in my opinion. He looks, like you said, like a clear sort of like top 15, top 20 guy going into next year. And I think that probably could have been said heading into this tournament, even before his strong performance. I know our West guys are really high on him for next year at McKeen's, and he definitely didn't disappoint. He was fantastic, like you said, and not just offensively, but all around. Kind of a Swiss Army knife for that U.S. team. And then comparing Hextall and Klepov, it's hard to say just based on a single tournament, right? I would say Klepov looked a little bit more dynamic, but not as consistent. So it's going to be interesting to see sort of how he develops in Saginaw this year. I think we sort of know what we're getting in Hextall. It's kind of like a high Q, high skill guy, can work the wall, can get pucks to the middle of the ice. Are the physical tools sort of high end enough? I think you'd probably say the same thing about Zielinski on that team, right? Are these guys more of like your late first, early second types, or are we looking at them being sort of solidified in the first round? It's going to be interesting to see how they perform this year in the USHL. Zielinski, I'm actually shocked isn't heading to the O. Heading in, actually, just to sort of divert a little bit. I know Zielinski wasn't somebody that you wanted to chat about here, but at the OHL draft, or not at the OHL draft, but during the OHL draft this year, I was told that he was somebody to really keep an eye on as like a potential top 40 pick, and somebody that could end up in the league. And then Ottawa definitely took him fairly early, but he hasn't signed, and I don't know. I haven't heard much noise about him signing. Ottawa has already signed a ton of guys. I feel like half the entire 67's roster is turned over from last year. So that's going to be interesting to watch. But yeah, I would say Klepov maybe has the highest upside to move ahead of those three if we're grouping them together, because I saw a little bit more dynamicism in his game. But also there's also the opportunity that, he's not as consistent, as more of like a mid-round guy for coming out of the OHL. So again, tough one single tournament. But I was really impressed with Klepov. I like the speed. I like the skill. I didn't find him to be a perimeter player at all, which I really liked. He was definitely somebody who was looking to get to the middle, was definitely, maybe not consistent in terms of his play away from the puck, but he showed flashes of being a guy that can be used in the forecheck, a guy that, puts forth an effort in all three zones, which, I might not have thought coming into the tournament based on what I saw in the USHL last year. So yeah, I'll definitely have my eye on him in Saginaw.
Klepov was a guy I was really interested in before this tournament, and I agree. Kind of when you read these guys, they're going to, he's going to be, he's a high skill guy. You kind of maybe you get that misconception he might be a perimeter guy, and I didn't find that at all. What I really like too is he would on the power play, instead of just staying on the half board, he's actually wheel around and get a lot of shots from the middle of the ice, which is quite effective. Anyway, I did really like him, but I did want to kind of go to Sweden. Hermansson was a guy that we also liked. From what I saw, I wouldn't say he has the hardest shot we've seen, but yet it is extremely effective, and he gets open all the time. So I just wanted to know kind of what you think of him and where, his ranking might be, or just, kind of generally where you think he might be falling right now.
Yeah, with Hermansson, I kind of see him a little bit like Wozniak heading into the year. I think it's just going to be about how consistent he is and how the sort of off-puck play develops. I think that there's an obvious upside as a goal scorer here. I just found that components of his game were a little bit inconsistent. Somebody that I kind of wanted to see be a little bit more assertive at times. I kind of see him sort of in that like 20 to 30 range probably right now. I was definitely a lot more impressed by Nordmark. I think most people were, but definitely was impressive, and definitely somebody who lived up to the hype. Like you said, he did enter the tournament with a fair amount of hype as one of the Swedish guys to watch, if you will.
Just to follow up there too with Nordmark, just like to point out his rights are owned by the London Knights, just to throw that in there, Rocco. Just you want to give some thoughts about him because he had a very dominant offensive tournament.
Yeah, just a little tidbit on Nordmark. During the tournament, I reached out to a Swedish contact and was told 0 chance of him ending up in London this year. So that kind of disappointed me. But, stranger things have happened. Sometimes zeros do turn into a higher percentage depending on what happens in Sweden for him. Just a dynamic player. He was fantastic. Really difficult to contain in transition. Played with a ton of pace, has a ton of skill. Definitely wasn't a perimeter guy at all. Was looking to get to the net. Was funneling pucks to the middle of the ice. Was just after every puck. Was sort of just the number one play creator in the entire tournament, in my opinion. And he's somebody that I think coming into the tournament was probably seen as like a next tier guy, not in that sort of top 10 tier, but sort of in that next tier with a large group of players. After that tournament, I think he's got to be in that top tier with some of the other forwards. I think you probably have to sort of lump him in with Bjork and Stenberg. Thank you. Sorry. You have to lump him in with those two as Sweden's sort of top players for this draft. I think that he looked every bit of one of the top forwards available this year.
I'll touch on Sweden. Oh, go ahead, boys.
I'll go one more. Also, speaking of kind of poor penalty calls in that last game, Malte Gustafsson was one of the guys who got a poor call against him in that game. We liked him as well, kind of going into the tournament, at least what we saw, the body type and, just kind of looked like overall kind of solid skill set, maybe not an elite skill. Kind of what do you think of his tournament as well?
Yeah, I thought he was good. Honestly, I thought a lot of the Swedish guys were fairly solid. I thought he was one of them. And I think that it's looking like Sweden could have upwards of maybe 5-6 guys that are considered first-round talents this year. When you factor in some of the defenders, other defenders anyway, and how you view them. But this looks like a really strong group for Sweden. Obviously, they couldn't get it done against the U.S., and it's kind of been a bit of a pattern for them at the Hlinka Gretzky, unfortunately. It's kind of evaded them. But Gustafsson was great. Holmertz, I thought, was good as well. It's just going to depend on, I guess, how you view Gustafsson's offensive upside over the course of the year. I think that's sort of going to be the number one. Is he somebody that can be sort of a more dynamic player with the puck, or is he, as you said, more of like a steady Eddie back there?
One guy in Sweden, and you mentioned the defenseman and Gustafsson, and I may read a fairly similar scouting report for this guy, but someone who stood out to me that I hadn't watched or heard of really prior to the tournament was Theodore Knights. Did you have any thoughts on him and his game and where, if that's someone who caught your attention as well?
Yeah, he definitely did. I thought the entire sort of Swedish blue line was fairly solid. He was somebody that caught my eye. Piiparinen on Finland was fantastic. I'd probably put him ahead of those two. But again, for a lot of these guys, I think it's just going to depend on what we see offensively over the course of the year, and if they can sort of break in with the strong group of Canadian defenders that are available. I think guys like Gustafsson, Piiparinen had better tournaments than some of the higher ranked Canadian defenders. That's for sure. But it is only one tournament, so it's going to be interesting to see how that lines up over the year. Again, that whole Swedish blue line what was, in my opinion, really good, and that was sort of the read that I had coming into the tournament as well. Our Swedish scouts have kind of told us that it was a really strong defensive group, good mix of different players as well. So definitely. It's a rebound year for Europe in general, right? Like we definitely saw a poor showing from the European nations in the 2025 draft. 2026 looks like it's a really good year for Europe. It's going to be interesting to see, how these players develop by the end of the year, looking at to the U18s.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I'll add the United States to that list too. It looks like a much stronger group from pretty much every country other than Canada, who's always, that's not a trip at them, they're always strong, obviously. But you mentioned Finland, so I'll use that as an opportunity to pivot there. Piiparinen was someone that really caught my eye. It was hard not to notice him when he was out there, and I agree with you completely. He's put himself very much in that conversation with that quote unquote preseason consensus of 5-6 defensemen, depending how you look at it. So let's touch on Finland. Two guys that me and Darren both felt really stood out and frankly dominated against Canada was Suvanto and Hemming. Hemming, obviously we knew ahead of time because of his brother. Suvanto, that was my first look at him, and probably about 3 shifts into him, I was checking his birthday to see when he was available. I'm like, why have I never heard of this guy? But give me your thoughts on those two, and Piiparinen obviously talked about, and maybe if there's anyone else on Finland other than those top 3 obvious guys that caught your eye as well.
Yeah, Suvanto was probably the most eye-opening player of the entire tournament for me, because he wasn't somebody that was really mentioned by our Finnish scouts or our European video scouts in general at McKeen's heading into the tournament, heading into this draft year. But here's a big power center, that looked every bit of a potential sort of number 2, number 3 at the NHL level moving forward. The type of guys that NHL scouts are really clamoring over these days. He was fantastic. He really was. So he was like you, Rocco, like after that Canada-Finland game, it was kind of like this is a guy that I need to take notice of moving forward. So he's definitely somebody I'll be watching. Hemming was great. It was kind of hard for me because his brother did not have a great year in the OHL, and I kind of didn't know what to expect of him, of Oscar coming into this tournament, and if they were sort of similar players. But he was fantastic. So definitely have my eye on him. Maybe he finds his way to the OHL at some point this year. I'm not going to hold out too much hope, but maybe he wants to join his brother in the league. We'll see. And that's if his brother's even in the league. His brother obviously can play other area. He can play in the AHL. He has some options available to him because he wasn't drafted out of the OHL. So we'll see what Dallas ends up doing there. But Hemming was great. The other part of that line, at least early on, they split them up later in the tournament. But was it Vanhatalo? I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation. Yeah, Vanhatalo. There you go. Thank you. He was great too. Big body, big shot. Maybe not as dynamic as Hemming, maybe not as consistent as Suvanto, but I think that there's a lot of upside there as a guy that can put the puck in the net, that can bang bodies a little bit. So he was somebody that caught my eye for sure. In general, just nice to see Finland have a bounce back year, because last year's crop was just not good. It was not good, right? So it was good to see them have a much better group, because in general, like watching the U17s last year, I didn't think that this Finnish group was that strong either. Not a lot of guys really, really popped off for me watching the U17s last year. So they were a lot better than I expected them to be.
I'll let Boyce jump in here, but just one thing that I wanted to mention when I was watching Suvanto, I was like, this might be Mikko Koivu's nephew or something. Given pretty good Koivu vibes, big, strong, two-way play, so super consistent. Like you said, I'm like, this guy's looks like a top 9 center to me in pretty much any league there. So, Boyce, go ahead with what you have next.
Just to follow up on Suvanto, again, it's early in the draft process. We've kind of looked at the draft. There's a lot of D depth, it looks like. And a lot of kind of, I would say, skill on the wings. Is Suvanto maybe a guy you could see jump up a lot here, just because there is a little bit of a lack of say, depth at center. Is that something we could see here?
I think so. I think for sure it's just going to depend on how the offensive game develops. I mean, we're talking similar things about Jan Chovan at this point last year as well, right? And then he didn't have a very good offensive year, and it was kind of like, okay, this guy looks more of like a bottom six potential contributor. So with Suvanto, great tournament, but let's see sort of how he follows it up. But I think that if he has a good year playing in Finland, playing in the U20 league, maybe getting some time in Liga, this is somebody that could definitely sort of push into that first round range. I guarantee you many scouts are a lot more familiar with him now after that Hlinka performance than they were previous to that. That's for sure.
No, and that's
I was going to
go ahead, Darren.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of go forward to with the goaltending.
Well, hold on, but I knew you were going there.
Thoughts on the goalies in the tournament.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Just what are your thoughts kind of on the draft eligible goaltending, from this tournament and in general? Because again, I tend to like looking at the goaltenders maybe more than most people. It's just kind of the thing that I like to do. I wasn't totally impressed with a lot of the goaltending in this tournament. So what's your take kind of on what the draft class is at that position, or what are you hearing from scouts that are, what their opinion is of that position?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a tremendous showing at the Hlinka Gretzky. It doesn't look like a tremendous crop for the goaltenders, which I would have said is the opposite of last year. I really like last year's goaltending group. This year, I don't know if there's anybody that really pops off the page from the OHL. I don't know really what we're going to see there from the dub. Probably it looks like maybe Carter Casey, a late birthday that just signed, might be one of the better options. From Europe, it doesn't look like there's any really true standouts. I mean, Polton was sort of the guy that I had circled, but I don't know if he was tremendous. I mean, he was good, but I don't think he was tremendous in the tournament. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of shakes out, who ends up being sort of the number one goalie of this class. Because even when you look at a guy like Casey, who was phenomenal to close out the USHL season last year and is now moving to the dub, he's not huge. So I don't know if we have sort of that Ravensburgen type of goaltending prospect available this year who's got the size, athleticism, pedigree sort of makeup that you want in today's sort of top-notch goaltending prospect. But we'll see. I mean, usually it's a slow burn for the goalies. They're very rarely, at least in my experience, you have one that like coming into the year is, okay, this is sort of like your solidified number one. If it is the case, it's usually a later birthday, like a Ravensburgen.
Yeah, I agree with that in this sense. I think we were a little spoiled last year with the goaltending crop. You had 3 to upwards of 6 guys, I guess, depending which outlet you were asking, that were quite strong goaltenders. So hopefully we can see a couple guys emerge from the shadows as the season goes on, and give that goaltending class a little bit more depth, so I don't have to listen to Darren Boyce complain about it all year long. I really don't want to do that. I want to come back to Canada now, since we gave everyone else their due here. We didn't want to make it too much Canada focus, but let's focus on it for a little bit. You mentioned their coaching, and this is unfortunately something we've had to discuss with Canadian teams at these international tournaments, it seems, the last few years. 2 things that I noticed, aside from the fact that the lines were constantly really in a blender a lot of the time, I thought Mathis Preston was electric at times, and 3-on-3 came around and I didn't see him hopping over the boards too much. I was very shocked, confused, disappointed by that. I felt, they leaned on Lawrence and rightfully so, but then you see other guys, Jolka, not to take things away from the guys who were coming over the boards in overtime, but let's face it, Mathis Preston might have been your most dangerous player on that entire roster, at least offensively. Were you concerned with that specifically? And another thing I noticed, I found that the Canadian guys who came in with a lot of notoriety, and I found there was a lot of individual efforts, a rush, and then a shot at the end of the rush, kind of from the outside or from, outside the ring at line or wherever, that top of the circles, I suppose. Did you find that? And you mentioned you found they didn't gel, but that was one reason that I felt that was the case. So maybe if you could touch on those two things, because there were things that stood out to me.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think the utilization of certain players was kind of a head scratcher at times. Like, for example, I'm kind of shocked. You mentioned Zilkin. I'm also shocked at sort of how much they leaned on Valentini. So utilization was at times a bit of a head scratcher. And yeah, I think to a certain extent, because there wasn't a really great gelling of certain players, I feel like there was a bit of individualism kind of happening for all players across Team Canada as crunch time kind of hit. Guys were trying to make plays for themselves, and that's not to say that they were, for lack of a better term, trying to play hero puck, right? Like they wanted to be the guy that won it for Canada and helped achieve team success through their individual efforts. That's natural. It's going to happen in a tournament like this. But I think that's sort of maybe on the coaching staff for not finding lines that worked early on and having to put them in a blender, like you said.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up with one more, and this is something maybe I'm just trying to cover my own tracks here, but someone that I was really looking forward to seeing getting an opportunity with some of the top skilled guys was Cooper Williams, and I thought that that's a very creative, highly intelligent offensive player. Now you could say that about a lot of the wingers that they had. It was a lot of highly creative types. So there's only so many spots in that role to go around. But then he came in. Then he came in for a game at the end of the tournament, made an impact right away. Is there anyone other than, that was a guy for me, but is there anyone in that mold for you that you felt like, hey, I really would have liked to see this guy get more of an opportunity, especially after a couple games there where you could tell there was maybe some chemistry things going on despite the fact that they were winning games?
Yeah, I think Mbuyi is another example. I thought that when he did receive a little bit more ice time, he was good, just like Williams. So I think just based on how good those two were in the CHL last year, I would have liked to have seen them a little bit more, especially when the line sort of went in a blender. It's like, why not try to put them with some of the higher skill guys and not just sort of spot duty on the fourth line. I think I would have liked to have seen the Ruck Preston trio a little bit early on in the tournament, given their previous chemistry with each other. Because when they were put together, it was pretty good, and then they got split up anyway by the end of the tournament. It was kind of like things started to work, and then it was, let's split it up. So yeah, I think in general, utilization was an issue. I know we keep kind of going back to that. I sound like a broken record here, but I don't think they necessarily picked the wrong players. I was at the development camp. I thought they picked the right players for this team based on what I saw. It's more so the line combinations and utilization, which I thought were an issue.
A guy that I liked in this tournament, and again was interested coming in, was Beckham Edwards. I thought he actually had a pretty good tournament, but again, I'm not sure he was maybe utilized as much as he could have been. He's a guy I really liked in Sarnia last year, and I know they were not a great team. I guess kind of what do you think of him, and what do you I guess because OHL is kind of your bread and butter here. What do you think about him and Iorio here kind of going into the draft after they guys you've targeted as well just for the year, to be looking at as first rounders, or are they kind of more like second rounders to you?
Yeah, I like both players a lot. Edwards has a ton of speed. I think he's a guy that has a lot of upside. I thought he had a really good tournament in spurts. I don't think he necessarily gelled with anybody either. I don't know if that's on, again, coaches for not finding that right pivot for him or finding the right position for him, because he kind of moved all over the place. But I thought he brought energy in puck pursuit. I thought his speed was a big factor at times. He's obviously got the goal scoring ability. I think he's a solid player. I think he's a first round guy for me going into the year. and one of my favorite OHLers heading into this draft class. So I agree with you there, Darren. Iorio, I think it's just a matter of how you see his offensive upside. I think coming into the OHL, he was viewed as a really high upside guy. Now, I don't know if we necessarily sort of see that. I think he kind of looks more of like a solid two-way high IQ type. And I'm curious to see sort of what his production looks like in Sarnia this year. I would say Edwards has a higher upside, whereas Iorio is more of that jack of all trades type of player. And I kind of want to see sort of how his skill set develops over the course of the year. He has a lot of good parts to his game. It's a matter of, how do you view the upside? Is he a bottom six guy? Is he a middle six guy? Is he a top six guy? I want to see, is he a center? Is he a wing? Right? He can play both positions. So I think we'll learn a little bit more about his game and upside this year in Sarnia.
I'll give you one more Canada question before I'll let Boyce jump back in there. But just because, you obviously are focused a lot on the OHL, the only two guys that we really haven't touched on for Canada would be Lemieux and Fitzgerald in terms of OHLers. I'll give you basically the same question Darren just gave you. What are your thoughts on them coming into the season and what they might need to do to keep a high draft status?
Yeah, I like Lemieux a lot. I don't think he's necessarily a first rounder. But I think that, his speed, sort of that high energy style of play is going to endear him to NHL scouts. I really liked him at last year's U17s. I thought he was one of Canada's better performers at that event. Had an okay year in Windsor, getting into the groove of things on a strong Windsor team was a little bit difficult for him at times. So yeah, he's somebody that I'll have an eye on to see how the offensive production ticks up. And then Fitzgerald, sorry, my brain stopped working there for a quick second. Fitzgerald was a bit of a disappointment for me. From my understanding, he hit a bit of a growth spurt this offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays on his game. I think that if anything, I was a little bit disappointed that he didn't bring it a little bit more physically at this tournament. I kind of expected him to come in and play sort of that Brady Martin kind of role. And I feel like he kind of was a guy that didn't have an identity at the tournament, didn't know sort of how to play, for lack of a better term, right? Like in terms of his personal utilization, he didn't get a ton of consistent ice time. I'm curious to see how he develops in Peterborough this year. I want to see how the offensive game develops because I think he has upside. He would have been sort of probably number 4 or 5 from the OHL heading into this tournament for me. And I think he probably exits the tournament more of like 7, 8. So probably like as a late first, early second now, as opposed to somebody that I viewed a little bit higher coming into the tournament. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with Fitzgerald. I want to see the physical intensity be a lot more consistent, proving that he can be sort of that big power pivot. Because now that he's bulked up, he's added some muscle, he's grown a little bit. You're looking at a guy that NHL scouts should love. But is he more of like is he Ole Josephson or is he Brady Martin? I mean, that's sort of where we're at heading into this year, I think.
Last Canada guy I kind of want to go over here was Ryan Lynn. I know he's not an OHL guy, but just your kind of opinion of his game in this tournament, because again, you kind of see the high end, but then there's, again, I think you mentioned it before, there's some defensive lapses there. I question his skating there a little bit. So and you see him kind of top 10 in a lot of different ranking services, I guess, that you're looking at right now. So just your thoughts on him and kind of where, I guess, what scouts kind of think of him, especially after this tournament. Where do you think he'll end up?
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed by Lynn's performance. Not going to lie, at the development camp, like he was amazing. He was the best player on the ice by a country mile. Better than Verhoeff, better than Carels, better than Belchetz. He was the best player at that camp. So I kind of thought he would come into this tournament and really, really put this team on his back, especially, with how solid he was at the U18s as an underager this past year. So his performance was a little bit underwhelming for me. I feel like he never really found a groove. By the end of the tournament, he was struggling a little bit defensively. You can tell that he just needs to bulk up. He was struggling to contain along the wall. He was struggling to contain near the net. He had some problems with some turnovers in the defensive end. I think his skating is going to be the point of contention this year. I've seen everything from fantastic skater to skating needs to improve. What's the true story here, right? And as an undersized guy, it kind of reminds me a little bit of thinking back to like a Luca Cagnoni, like a Olin Zellweger, where the skating was viewed kind of differently by every different person. And I think it depends on what you value. I think Lynn has good feet. I think that there's definitely maybe a need for him to improve his quickness to help him sort of escape the forecheck and create some of that space coming out of his own end. And as an undersized guy, how's that going to be viewed this year? We saw how average-sized defenders were penalized at the most recent draft, with no defenders under 6 feet, right? So, how's he going to be viewed? I think coming into the draft year, I think he definitely needs to be viewed as a top 15 guy still. I think benefit of the doubt is there. He had a fantastic WHL season. He had a great U18s last year. I mean, when you look at it, no one on this Canadian blue line really had a great tournament, so I don't think you can necessarily hold that against him. I think you got to see how he does in the WHL this year and see if his defensive game improves over the course of the year, because that's going to be the key. He's going to put up points again. There's no question about it. But can the defensive game improve? And how do we see the evolution of his skating heading into the draft year? I think that's definitely going to be key. I think we run the gamut of a variety of different scenarios here. Like, if he has a fantastic year, he could be that guy that doesn't matter the size. He's viewed as a top 10, top 12 lottery pick. If not, maybe he's a Kivi Harju type that falls to the second, third, fourth round, right? Defenders are tough to rank early. It really is. It's a hard one to do, because we see that with forwards, even if they disappoint, there's a tendency for them to still sort of be drafted in that second round range. With defenders, they go from being first round candidates to not being drafted at all. I mean, you look at guys just from the OHL in recent years, like Anthony Cristoforo, like Cam Allen. Those were two guys that were considered first round picks. Cristoforo, not even drafted. Cam Allen, late round pick. It can be tough to project draft stock of defenders early on. So I think you have to consider him still pretty high, but I definitely don't think he had a tremendous tournament, not the way that I expected anyway.
How would you contrast, and I guess I lied. I got one more Canada question for you, then we can wrap up more or less. But we have the general consensus right now is that Verhoeff is the top defender in the class. I think Ryan Lynn maybe worked down a couple spots, if anything, or stayed steady. But there's two other guys, and they're interesting because you have a guy in Daxon Rudolph with just so many physical tools, and you see that goal from the top of the goal from the point shot he scored, just awesome play, and then there's some head scratching moments as well. But he's a massive right-hand defenseman. Very good puck game, and that's obviously highly coveted. Then you have a guy like Carson Carels, who I actually felt for my money had maybe the steadiest tournament of that group of guys, and that's just so his game. He's just so typically so steady Eddie. I mean, one gaff there against Finland, but that cost him a goal. But for the most part, for a 17-year-old kid, he plays some very, very, very sound hockey in terms of for decision making, but not quite as big as Rudolph. Doesn't play the premium position of the right-hand defenseman, but I watched him and I felt that he helped push play more in his favor, even though it may have been not quite as flashy of play. So, and they're two guys who should be debated pretty closely this year. How would you factor in kind of the steadiness and the soundness of Carels versus maybe the premium position and a little bit bigger and that sort of thing that Rudolph brings to the table?
Yeah, I really like Carels. He's probably the second defender for me behind Verhoeff right now. like you said, just steady. I thought he was Canada's best defender at this tournament. I thought he was one of Canada's best defenders at the U18s as an underager. I think that we're probably underrating his offensive upside a little bit as well, just because of how sort of steady his decision making is. He's not as flashy as a DuPont or Verhoeff on the back end, but he's definitely somebody that I think can be maybe like a Noah Dobson type of player moving forward. Obviously, maybe that's not the best comparison defensively because Dobson can struggle in his own end at times. But I'm just thinking offensively, just in terms of keeping things simple sometimes, and that being the best avenue to creating offense. So yeah, he'd be number 2. And Rudolph, I thought, had a good tournament too. Maybe a little bit inconsistent, just like the rest of the blue line. But I was told to sort of watch out for him being a little bit more offensively oriented than maybe we had seen so far. So I'm going to have my eyes on him. I know our West Scouts are kind of split on him a little bit currently. So he's a guy that I think definitely needs to be considered a first round candidate, like you said, but kind of like a Jackson Smith heading into the year, right? Maybe not the feet that Jackson had. I think the skating is definitely something that we're going to have to watch for progression this year with Rudolph. But definitely looks like he has everything else. So it's a matter of how those pieces come together. I'd probably have him in a tier sort of below some of the other guys. I think Piiparinen would be ahead of him at this point. I would probably have Ryan Lynn ahead of him at this point. So he'd be sort of in that like mid to back half of the first, at least comparing him to some other defenders available.
Yeah, I agree on your take with Carels there. For my money, again, I mean, a guy that plays that mature of a game and does have the physical tools that you can see the development and the upside. I thought they really missed him when he got hurt, and you noticed him. You noticed his absence on that team, and much like the forwards. And I'll get your take on this. Did you feel that the defensemen couldn't really, like, they had 4 righties and they're trying to basically play 5 guys into all top 4 minutes and top 4 situations? Did you feel that was interesting? They kind of should have just picked a guy that said, "Hey, look, for this tournament, you're on the third pair. We need to kind of have a little consistency here." And was that something that you'd look for maybe some improvements for moving forward for Team Canada? When now it's an embarrassment of riches situation, right? And you want to give all those guys, but I thought that was something that hurt them, and especially when Carels got hurt, you really noticed his presence. But I'll get your thoughts on that, and then I'll let Boyce ask one more here.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, Rocco. I think that outside of Carels, even at camp, none of the left-handed guys really stood out to give them that kind of option. Croskery was okay. I think he deserved to play a little more. Chartrand was okay playing his role. A guy coming into the camp that I thought maybe had a strong chance to make this team as a left-handed defender was Jacob Jew out of Kitchener, but he didn't have a very good camp at all, so he kind of took himself out of the equation there. So the lefties, the minimal ones that they did have at camp weren't fantastic, so I think they were kind of forced to try to make this work, and I agree. You could tell that it was kind of like forcing the square peg in the round hole at times, and some guys were just not comfortable with the roles they were assigned. So yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily something you can pin on the coaching staff. It's more just on what you've had available to you. It's a strong group of right-handed shot defenders for this Canadian group, and heading into the U18s, depending on who's available, that'll be something they're going to have to look at, knowing what they've seen now at the Hlinka and how comfortable some of these guys are with particular roles.
So I'll end it here. We kind of went over the top 4 teams here. Was there a couple guys from any of the remaining 4 teams that really impressed you, that made him moved up in your rankings, or gave you, at least, I need to really look at this guy further?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say so. I thought the top 4 of the tournament were the top 4 for a reason. The Czechs I thought were kind of underwhelming, especially offensively. Their power play was atrocious. I know that's a very strong word, but even, our our Czech and Slovak scouts felt the same way. They kind of had a very vanilla team. The Germans that was probably the worst U18 German team I can remember watching. Like they struggled to really make anything happen. They're falling all over the ice. They were not connecting passes. They're going to be in tough at the U18s to stay in the main group, in my opinion. And we saw that with Switzerland kind of dominating them in the last place game. And Switzerland's been relegated at the U18 level. They're going to be in Division 1 trying to promote, and they probably will. But yeah, I don't know if there was necessarily a guy that I felt really, really stood out from another nation. Not in a way where I was like, oh yeah, like this is a guy that I have to keep an eye on. There were guys that are coming into the tournament I had circled, like Max Penkin as an underager from Germany, but I thought he was really not great. Politin was a guy we mentioned earlier, the Czech goalie. I thought he maybe might be the top goalie in this class, but I thought he was just average at the tournament. The Czech's defense core was okay. There's going to be a couple OHL guys from that group. So we'll see how they develop over the course of the year in Ottawa and Niagara and Roman Reisnecker. So yeah, I don't know necessarily outside of the top four if anybody really, really stood out. I mean, to flip the equation here and to play host, like, was there anybody on either of those two nations for you guys?
Not really. If I'm being completely honest,
not particularly. No.
I had a pretty tough time. I mean, at this point, I feel like I've been scouting Neuenschwander for 5 years. You've known about him since he's 11 years old, basically. But again, he's not available in this draft class. So I was fairly underwhelmed, I think, by the few guys that I did know about from those other smaller nations coming in. Didn't see necessarily a first rounder there. Brock, I got one quick one for you, and then we'll wrap up here. We're going to do just a quick rapid fire 25 versus 26. I'm going to throw out a position. You're going to tell me which draft class so far, in your opinion, is stronger. Let's start at center ice, 25 or 26.
25.
On wing,
26.
Right-handed defenseman,
26.
Left-handed defenseman,
neither. No, you have to go 2025 because you got Matthew Schaefer. I mean, that having him and that as part of the draft class elevates that for sure. So 2025 for left-handed defense.
And goaltenders.
Definitely 2025 so far, based on what we've seen.
Right on. I love it, Brock. Thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic. We look forward to following your work throughout the season. As always, you can catch Brock at McKeen's Hockey. And of course, we are at the Puck Bunker. Thank you guys for your time, and we'll see everyone soon.